Hello, this is Rachel Durkin Durga, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the 7th of January issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. TTC wants more money from the city in 2026. Its proposed spending plan for next year is up for debate today, by Andy Takagi. The TTC is asking City Council for $1.48 billion, an increase of 6.8%, to fund its spending plan for next year, which includes improving service to pre-pandemic levels and a continuing fare freeze. The two rider-focused promises, which Mayor Olivia Chow announced at campaign-style events ahead of October's municipal election, are contained in the TTC's $3.03 billion proposed operating budget for 2026, which is being debated at its board meeting today. Chow has not officially announced whether she will run for re-election, but in the final months of 2025, she has made announcements about bringing Line 1 and Line 2 service back to pre-pandemic levels to help boost rush hour service, promised another year of frozen fares, and introduced fare capping, which would replace the monthly pass system. This is also the first budget under the TTC's new CEO, Mandeep Lally, who took over the city's transit agency in July. The proposed increase for 2026 follows last year's bump of 6.5% and comes at a time when the TTC has struggled to bring back riders since the pandemic, despite return-to-office mandates that kicked in for many workers in fall of 2025. Ridership was significantly below projections last year, which the TTC blamed on lower international student enrollment and poor economic conditions. Because of that lower ridership, the transit agency had to pull $35 million out of its reserve fund, making for a gloomier financial outlook in 2027 if the TTC's finances don't bounce back this year. The TTC has struggled with delivering consistent, on-time service to riders, many of whom have become increasingly frustrated. Slow zones, parts of the track where trains come to a crawl, persist across the system, in part due to the TTC's growing state of good repair backlog. And the Finch West LRT, the city's first new transit line in more than 2 decades, built by Metrolinx and operated by the TTC, has struggled to operate at promised speeds and in poor weather conditions. Those problems loom over the agency as it prepares to ferry the flurry of attendees expected for the FIFA World Cup in June, without provincial or federal operating funds. Doctors fear CDC vaccine recommendation changes will fuel vaccine hesitancy in Canada, by Hannah Alberga. Sweeping changes to the childhood vaccine schedule in the U.S. are concerning doctors who say Canadian parents might get the false impression that it's unsafe to immunize their children. Ontario Medical Association President Dr. Zainab Abdurrahman says she is most worried about the confusion that parents may feel when they see that the U.S. and Canada have different immunization recommendations for kids. She says that can drive misinformation, causing a rise of serious illnesses that are preventable. Quote, "From a Canadian perspective, it's a cautionary tale for us," end quote, Abdurrahman said, speaking about the resurgence of preventable diseases that can happen after even a small drop in immunization levels, as seen with the measles outbreaks over the past year. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated its routine vaccine schedule on Monday, reducing the number of recommended shots. The Public Health Agency of Canada says those changes do not affect vaccine decision-making in Canada, which is informed by rigorous reviews of all available evidence. Several vaccines that prevent illnesses, such as rotavirus and meningococcal disease, are no longer recommended for all children by the CDC. Neither are the flu and RSV shots. Instead, they're either recommended for, quote, certain high-risk groups, end quote, or, quote, based on shared clinical decision-making, end quote. Abdurrahman said Canada's vaccine schedule remains based in science and unless there is a change in evidence, the schedule will stay the same. Each routine vaccine is there for a reason, she says, selected specifically for the population it serves. Its absence would play a big role in the resurgence of disease, which could limit healthcare capacity. Echoing that sentiment, Dr. Joan Robinson, a pediatric infectious diseases physician in Edmonton, speaking on behalf of the Canadian Pediatric Society, says Canada's schedule is based on the highest quality of evidence available, and none of the decisions are tied to political ideas or anecdotal reports. Maxwell Smith, a bioethicist and associate professor at Western University, says at first glance the CDC's decision to only recommend some vaccines to high-risk groups appears reasonable. But, he says, if the rest of the population is unimmunized, pathogens will spread and put vulnerable individuals at greater risk. Quote, "It simply wouldn't be circulating had we had more vaccination in the population," end quote, Smith said. For example, one of the vaccines that is included in the changes prevents meningitis, inflammation of the lining of the brain and spinal cord. Immunologist Dawn Bodish says a healthy child can suddenly die within a short period of time. Quote, "For many children, there's no way you can intervene medically fast enough to save them. So to pull that off the recommended list is an absolute mystery to me," end quote, she said. Bodish says any scenes of doubt among parents in the U.S. tend to spread into Canada. She says her message to parents is that information coming out of the United States is no longer reliable. Quote, "It pains me to say that, because historically the CDC was a world leader that the entire world could turn to for good information," end quote. Federal provincial leaders to tour Manitoba First Nation hit by outage and frozen pipes, by Brittany Hobson. Federal, provincial, and Indigenous leaders are expected to travel today to a beleaguered Manitoba First Nation that has been crippled by a frozen water system due to a days-long power outage. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, Federal Minister of Northern and Arctic Affairs Rebecca Chartrand, and Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepinak are scheduled to be part of a delegation that visits Pimicimicac Cree Nation to survey damage that has prompted the community to declare a state of emergency. Damage to critical infrastructure has forced thousands out from the nation, about 530 kilometers north of Winnipeg, with no timeline on when they can return. Chief David Manias says it's unclear how many of the more than 1,300 homes in the community have been affected by pipes bursting and sewage seeping in, because there hasn't been enough resources to check all of them. He says the community schools are also inoperable because of a damaged pipe and issues with the heating system. Manias has been calling for the deployment of the Canadian Armed Forces for emergency logistical support, including water delivery and sanitation work. The Manitoba government also reached out to Ottawa this week requesting military assistance for Pimicimicac. In a letter sent on Monday to Emergency Management Minister Eleanor Olszewski, the province asked the federal government to focus on the immediate assessment, repairing, and restoration of critical infrastructure. Quote, "Given the urgency of the situation, we appreciate Canada's swift attention to this matter, as the safety of the residents of the nation is our top priority," end quote, said Lisa Naylor, Manitoba's Transportation and Infrastructure Minister. Power was knocked out in the community on December 28th after a 300-meter-long line that runs between two islands in the Nelson River broke. It took Manitoba Hydro about 4 days to fix the break because of safety concerns in reaching the line. The Crown Corporation supplied a large generator to restore power to a water treatment plant, as well as generators to power 8 heavy-duty heaters for the community's use. However, Manias has said water also seeped into the sockets of some homes, with at least 4 fires in the community so far since the outage. He said about 35 homes are now uninhabitable. He was on the ground surveying homes on Tuesday and said some had severe sewage damage. Quote, sewage backs up right onto the bathtub, on the floor, and coming out of the toilets. It was really a health hazard. We had to wear masks to go in there, end quote. How Canadian agencies are embracing AI tools to defend national security, by Jim Bronskill. The National Spy Watchdog is reviewing the use and governance of artificial intelligence by Canada's security agencies. The National Security and Intelligence Review Agency has written to key federal ministers and organizations to inform them of the study. Here's a look at how some federal organizations are putting AI tools to work to support national security, intelligence, and risk assessment operations. Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, works to protect Canada from espionage, terrorism, and foreign interference. The Spy Service will initiate a pilot project early this year to assess AI tools for use in the transcription of audio content, translation of materials, and examination of documents to assist analysts, said spokesman Eric Balsam. CSIS will also test a chatbot-style tool to help write, edit, and summarize documents. The outputs of AI systems are always subject to human review to ensure accuracy and appropriateness, Balsam said. AI technologies being considered by CSIS undergo an algorithmic impact assessment to gauge risk and manage possible negative effects. The spy agency also seeks guidance from the Justice Department on legal considerations affecting proposed use of AI, Balsam said. Royal Canadian Mounted Police. A 2024 RCMP report on operational technologies said the force employed face matching, a function built into certain software applications used to process, sort, and analyze large volumes of images and videos. Quote, the RCMP uses this technology only for processing evidence that has been lawfully obtained in the course of an investigation, end quote, the report said. While AI offers the potential for efficient and innovative data processing and analysis in the policing and national security contexts, it also presents certain challenges, said RCMP spokeswoman Robin Percival. They include ensuring the legal and ethical collection and use of personal information, preventing potential misuses of information or use of inaccurate information, and preventing data access by unauthorized parties, she said. The RCMP has established an AI policy and solutions team to develop a framework for the responsible adoption of artificial intelligence tools, Percival said. It will involve the creation of working groups and drafting policies to allow RCMP employees to benefit further from new technologies, she added. Communications Security Establishment, or the CSE, Canada's cyber spy agency, uses artificial intelligence to help defend federal and critical infrastructure systems from cyber threats. The CSE's artificial intelligence strategy says this involves detecting patterns in vast quantities of data. Quote, machine learning helps enable the detection of a variety of threats to keep these systems and networks safe, end quote, the strategy says. The agency, which has long been at the forefront of technical innovation, also uses AI for malware classification. Quote, machine learning-enabled malware classification is crucial for CSE because it enables the detection and analysis of sophisticated cyber threats that standard antivirus solutions may not catch, end quote, the strategy says. Federal networks are often targeted for attack by foreign adversaries using custom malware, which requires more advanced detection capabilities than off-the-shelf antivirus software can provide, the document adds. In the coming years, AI capabilities will become more important to the CSE's efforts to protect Canadians, the strategy says. Quote, notably, if deployed safely, securely, and effectively, these capabilities will improve CSE's ability to analyze larger amounts of data faster and with more precision, end quote. Global Affairs Canada. A document search and analysis tool called Document Cracker was developed to help Global Affairs Canada officials quickly find the information they need, according to a Federal Register of AI projects across the government that was published last year. Quote, Document Cracker enables users to search across a large volume of documents using a sophisticated indexing platform and automatically monitors new documents for specific topics, emerging trends, and mentions of key people, locations, and organizations, end quote, the Register says. Quote, these features allow officials to quickly identify pressing issues, formulate a preferred stance, and track the evolving stances of other countries, end quote. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. The federal passport program uses facial recognition technology to support identity authentication, help detect fraud, and prevent passports and travel documents from being issued to ineligible applicants, the Federal AI Register says. Transport Canada. The Risk Evaluation and Conflict Tool Project is a data-driven initiative led by the department's Conflict Zone Information Office to improve Canada's ability to monitor and assess threats to passenger aircraft, the AI Register says. The tool was being developed to streamline the manual and resource-intensive process of open-source media monitoring, data analysis, and risk assessment through use of automation and AI technologies, the Register says. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. forces board Venezuela-linked sanctioned oil tanker in North Atlantic by the Associated Press. A U.S. official says U.S. forces have boarded a Venezuela-linked sanctioned oil tanker in the North Atlantic after pursuing it for weeks. The official spoke to the Associated Press on Wednesday on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive military operations. The U.S. had been pursuing the tanker since last month after it tried to evade a U.S. blockade on sanctioned oil vessels around Venezuela. It had been sanctioned by the U.S. in 2024 for allegedly smuggling cargo for a company linked to Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. The U.S. Coast Guard attempted to board it in the Caribbean in December as it headed for Venezuela. The ship refused boarding, and as it headed across the Atlantic, its name was changed from the Bella 1 to the Marinera and was reflagged to Russia, shipping databases show. Officials in the administration of President Donald Trump have said the U.S. will continue to seize sanctioned vessels connected to Venezuela after capturing President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Russia said the tanker was, quote, our vessel, end quote. Russia's foreign ministry said before the seizure that it was, quote, following with concern the anomalous situation that has developed around the Russian oil tanker Marinera, end quote. The ministry's statement, which was carried by the official TASS news agency, added that, quote, for several days now, a U.S. Coast Guard ship has been following the Marinera, even though our vessel is approximately 4,000 kilometers from the American coast, end quote. On Wednesday, open-source maritime tracking sites showed its position as between Scotland and Iceland, traveling north. The U.S. official also confirmed the ship was in the North Atlantic. In a post to social media, the U.S. European Command confirmed that the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Monroe tracked the ship ahead of its seizure, quote, pursuant to a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court, end quote. The military command went on to say that the seizure supported Trump's proclamation on targeting sanctioned vessels that, quote, threatened the security and the stability of the Western Hemisphere, end quote. Trump's former Russia advisor says Russia offered U.S. free rein in Venezuela in exchange for Ukraine, by Emma Burrows. Russian officials indicated in 2019 that the Kremlin would be willing to back off from its support for Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela in exchange for a free hand in Ukraine, according to Fiona Hill, an advisor to President Donald Trump at the time. The Russians repeatedly floated the idea of a, quote, very strange swap arrangement between Venezuela and Ukraine, end quote, Hill said during a congressional hearing in 2019. Her comments surfaced again this week and were shared on social media after the U.S. stealth operation to capture Maduro. Hill said Russia pushed the idea through articles in Russian media that referenced the Monroe Doctrine, a 19th century principle in which the U.S. opposed European meddling in the Western Hemisphere and in return agreed to stay out of European affairs. It was invoked by Trump to justify the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. Even though Russian officials never made a formal offer, Moscow's then ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, hinted many times to her that Russia was willing to allow the United States to act as it wished in Venezuela if the U.S. did the same for Russia and Europe, Hill told the Associated Press this week. Quote, before there was a hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, how about doing a deal, but nobody in the U.S. was interested then, end quote, Hill said. Trump dispatched Hill, then his senior advisor on Russia and Europe, to Moscow in April 2019 to deliver that message. She said she told Russian officials, quote, Ukraine and Venezuela are not related to each other, end quote. At that time, she said, the White House was aligned with allies in recognizing Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's interim president. But fast forward 7 years, and the situation is different. After ousting Maduro, the U.S. has said it will now, quote, run, end quote, Venezuela policy. Trump also has renewed his threat to take over Greenland, a self-governing territory of Denmark and part of the NATO military alliance, and threatened to take military action against Colombia for facilitating the global sale of cocaine. The Kremlin will be, quote, thrilled, end quote, with the idea that large countries such as Russia, the United States, and China get spheres of influence because it proves, quote, might makes right, end quote, Hill said. Trump's actions in Venezuela make it harder for Kyiv's allies to condemn Russia's designs on Ukraine as illegitimate because, quote, we've just had a situation where the U.S. has taken over, or at least decapitated, the government of another country using fiction, end quote, Hill told AP. The Trump administration has described its raid in Venezuela as a law enforcement operation and has insisted that capturing Maduro was legal. The Russian Foreign Ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Hill's account. Russian President Vladimir Putin has not commented on the military operation to oust Maduro, but the Foreign Ministry issued statements condemning U.S., quote, aggression, end quote. Coast Guard helicopter crew battles high winds to rescue 9 from grounded fishing boat in Alaska, by Mark Thiessen. 9 crew members were hoisted to a helicopter off a commercial crab boat amid near gale force winds, strong downward drafts from a nearby cliff, and rough seas, after the fishing vessel grounded on an Alaska island in the Bering Sea. The Coast Guard said there were no injuries to the crew members of the Arctic Sea, a 134-foot or 41-meter boat owned by the Coastal Villages Region Fund and fishing for Tanner crab. The ship grounded Monday on the northern shore of St. George Island, the southernmost of the small Pribilovs Islands group with fewer than 100 residents, predominantly Aleuts. The group of islands is located about 750 miles or 1,207 kilometers west of Anchorage. Quote, I'm on the fog, I'm on the beach, we lost our steering, end quote, someone from the Arctic Sea reports to the Coast Guard when calling in a mayday, according to audio provided by the Coast Guard. Quote, we're taking on water, end quote. The vessel came to a stop near a cliff face that rose hundreds of feet above the water, Lieutenant Commander Connor Reagan and Lieutenant Commander Josh Wombold, the pilots of the rescue helicopter, said in a joint statement to the Associated Press. The pilots positioned the MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter about 50 feet or 15 meters above the Arctic Sea and hovered in the rough conditions to conduct the rescue. Quote, due to how strong the winds were, we made sure to consider downdrafts coming off the cliffs and severe turbulence when hoisting the crew members from the Arctic Sea, end quote, Reagan said in an email to AP. Quote, the aircrew also conducted the hoists of all 9 crew members and the rescue swimmer in about 25 minutes, a testament to the skill and professionalism of the aircrew, end quote, Reagan said. Winds of nearly 60 miles per hour, or 96 kilometers per hour, and 10-foot or 3-meter seas caused the Arctic Sea to take on water and eventually go aground about 4 a.m. Monday. Video taken by a resident from atop the cliff showed waves slapping over the grounded ship. The North Sea, another fishing vessel owned by Coastal Villages, was nearby but couldn't assist the Arctic Sea because of the weather and the shallow water where it came to rest. However, the North Sea stayed nearby and kept a line of communications open to the Coast Guard, which deployed a helicopter, airplane, and rerouted its vessel, the Alex Haley. The Arctic Sea's crew put on survival suits about 8 a.m. and activated an emergency radio beacon to indicate their location, Eric Deacon, the CEO of Coastal Villages Region Fund, said in an email to the AP. The ship's fire suppression system activated, forcing the crew members from the enclosed bridge to the deck where they awaited rescue. The helicopter arrived around 11:30 a.m. Monday and performed the rescue operation. The rescued crew members were delivered to St. Paul Island, about 45 miles or 72 kilometers to the northwest, because St. George lacked emergency medical services support, and there was no way for the helicopter to refuel there. A private company has been contracted to oversee salvage operations of the Arctic Sea, the Coast Guard said. A town in North Carolina is returning land to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians by Graham Lee Brewer. An important cultural site is close to being returned to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians after a city council in North Carolina voted unanimously Monday to return the land. The Nokese Mound in Franklin, North Carolina, was part of a Cherokee mother town hundreds of years before the founding of the United States, and it is a place of deep spiritual significance to the Cherokee people. But for about 200 years, it was either in the hands of private owners or the town. Quote, when you think about the importance of not just our history, but those cultural and traditional areas where we practice all the things we believe in, they should be in the hands of the tribe they belong to, end quote, said Mitchell Hicks, principal chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Quote, it's a decision that we're very thankful to the town of Franklin for understanding, end quote. Nokese is the largest unexcavated mound in the southeast, said Elaine Eisenbraun, executive director of Nokese Initiative, the nonprofit that has managed the site since 2019. Eisenbraun, who worked alongside the town's mayor for several years on their return, said the next step is for the tribal council to agree to take control, which will initiate the legal process of transferring the title. Quote, it's a big deal for Cherokees to get our piece of ancestral territory back in general, end quote, said Angelina Jumper, a citizen of the tribe and a Nokese Initiative board member who spoke at Monday's city council meeting. Quote, but when you talk about a mound site like that has so much significance and is still standing as high as it was 200 or 300 years ago when it was taken, that kind of just holds a level of gravity that I just have no words for, end quote. In the 1940s, the town of Franklin raised money to purchase the mound from a private owner. Hicks said the tribe started conversations with the town about transferring ownership in 2012 after a town employee sprayed herbicide on the mound, killing all the grass. In 2019, Franklin and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians created a nonprofit to oversee the site, which today it is situated between 2 roads and several buildings. Quote, talking about land back, it's part of a living people. It's not like it's a historical artifact, end quote, said Stacy Guffey, Franklin's mayor, referencing the global movement to return indigenous homelands through ownership or co-stewardship. Quote, it's part of a living culture, and if we can't honor that, then we lose the character of who we are as mountain people, end quote. Nokese is part of a series of earthen mounds, many of which still exist, that were the heart of the Cherokee civilization. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians also owns the Cowie Mound a few miles away, and it is establishing a cultural corridor of important sites that stretches from Georgia to the tribe's reservation, the Qualla boundary. Nokisi, which translates to, quote, star place, end quote, is an important religious site that has provided protection to generations of Cherokee people, said Jordan Okuma, the groundskeeper of the mound. He said he is the first enrolled member of the tribe to caretake the mound since the forced removal. Quote, it's also a place where when you need answers or you want to know something, you can go there and you ask and it'll come to you, end quote, he said. Quote, it feels different from being anywhere else in the world when you're out there, end quote. The mound will remain publicly accessible, and the tribe plans to open an interpretive center in a building it owns next to the site. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Denmark and Greenland seek talks with Rubio over U.S. interest in taking the island. By Stephanie Dazio. Denmark and Greenland are seeking a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio after the Trump administration doubled down on its intention to take over the strategic Arctic island, a Danish territory. Tensions escalated after the White House said Tuesday that the, quote, U.S. military is always an option, end quote. President Donald Trump has argued that the U.S. needs to control the world's largest island to ensure its own security in the face of rising threats from China and Russia in the Arctic. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen warned earlier this week that a U.S. takeover would amount to the end of the NATO military alliance. Quote, the Nordics do not lightly make statements like this, end quote, Maria Martisuti, a defense analyst at the European Policy Center think tank, told the Associated Press on Wednesday. Quote, but it is Trump, whose very bombastic language bordering on direct threats and intimidation is threatening the fact to another ally by saying, quote, I will control or annex the territory, end quote. The leaders of France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom joined Frederiksen in a statement Tuesday, reaffirming that the mineral-rich island, quote, belongs to its people, end quote. Their statement defended the sovereignty of Greenland, which is a self-governing territory of Denmark and thus part of NATO. This weekend's U.S. military action in Venezuela has heightened fears across Europe, and Trump and his advisors in recent days have reiterated the U.S. leader's desire to take over the island, which guards the Arctic and North Atlantic approaches to North America. Quote, it's so strategic right now, end quote, Trump told reporters Sunday. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen and his Greenlandic counterpart Vivian Motzfeldt have requested the meeting with Rubio in the near future, according to a statement posted Tuesday to Greenland's government website. Previous requests for a sit-down were not successful, the statement said. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said he spoke by phone Tuesday with Rubio, who dismissed the idea of a Venezuela-style operation in Greenland. Quote, in the United States, there is massive support for the country belonging to NATO, a membership that, from one day to the next, would be compromised by any form of aggressiveness toward another member of NATO, end quote, Barrot told France Interradio Wednesday. Asked if he has a plan in case Trump does claim Greenland, Barrot said he won't engage in, quote, fiction diplomacy, end quote. While most U.S. Republicans have supported Trump's statement, Senators Jeanne Shaheen and Thom Tillis, the Democratic and Republican co-chairs of the bipartisan Senate NATO Observer Group, blasted Trump's rhetoric in a statement Tuesday. Quote, when Denmark and Greenland make it clear that Greenland is not for sale, the United States must honor its treaty obligations and respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark, end quote, the statement said. Quote, any suggestion that our nation would subject a fellow NATO ally to coercion or external pressure undermines the very principles of self-determination that our alliance exists to defend, end quote. Philippines evacuates 3,000 villagers after volcano activity raises alert level, by Jim Gomez. A series of mild eruptions at the most active volcano in the Philippines has prompted the evacuation of nearly 3,000 villagers in a permanent danger zone on its foothills, officials said Wednesday. Authorities raised the five-step alert around Mayon volcano in the northeastern province of Albay to level 3 on Tuesday, after detecting intermittent rockfalls, some as big as cars, from its peak crater in recent days, along with deadly pyroclastic flows, a fast-moving avalanche of super-hot rock fragments, ash, and gas. Alert Level 5 would indicate a major explosive eruption, often when violent ejections of ash and debris and widespread ashfall is underway. Quote, "This is already an eruption, a quiet one, with lava accumulating up the peak and swelling the dome, which cracked in some parts and resulted in rockfalls, some as big as cars," end quote. Teresita Balcalo, the country chief's volcanologist, told the Associated Press. He said it is too early to tell if Mayon's restiveness would worsen and lead to a major and violent eruption, given the absence of other key signs of unrest, like a spike in volcanic earthquake and high levels of sulfur dioxide emissions. Troops, police, and disaster mitigation personnel helped evacuate more than 2,800 villagers from 729 households inside a 6-kilometer or 3.7-mile radius from the volcano's crater that officials have long designated a permanent danger zone, demarcated by concrete warning signs, Albay provincial officials said. Another 600 villagers living outside the permanent danger zone have evacuated voluntarily to government-run emergency shelters to be safely away from the volcano, Claudio Yucat, regional director of the Office of Civil Defense, said. Entry to the permanent danger zone in the volcano's foothills is prohibited, but thousands of villagers have flouted the restrictions and made it their home or maintained farms on and off for generations. Lucrative businesses such as sand and gravel quarrying and sightseeing tours have also thrived openly despite the ban and the mountain's frequent eruptions, now 54 times since record began in 1616. The 2,462-meter or 8,007-foot volcano is one of the Philippines' top tourism draws because of its near-perfect cone shape, but it's also the most active of the country's 24 restive volcanoes. A terrifying symbol of Mayon's deadly fury is the belfry of a 16th-century Franciscan stone church, which protrudes from the ground in Albay. It's all that's left of a Baroque church that was buried by volcanic mudflow along with the town of Cagsawa in an 1814 eruption, which killed about 1,200 people, including many who sought refuge in the church, about 13 kilometers or 8 miles from the volcano. The thousands of people who live within Mayon's danger zone reflect the plight of many impoverished Filipinos who are forced to live in dangerous places across the archipelago, near active volcanoes like Mayon, on landslide-prone mountainsides, along vulnerable coastlines, atop earthquake fault lines, and in low-lying villages often engulfed by flash floods. Each year, about 20 typhoons and storms batter the Philippines, which lies along the Pacific, quote, ring of fire, end quote, an arc of fault lines along the Pacific Ocean basin, often hit by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Election runner-up in Central African Republic alleges fraud in vote, by Jean-Ferdinand Koina and Wilson McMacken. The runner-up in Central African Republic's presidential election rejected the provisional results on Wednesday and alleged widespread fraud, while the Russia-allied country's leader said he had invited President Vladimir Putin to visit. Anicet Georges Dolaguele claimed that Sunday's election data had been manipulated by the National Elections Authority. Quote, "We all know that more than half of the results have not been taken into account," Dolaguele said. "All the figures announced by the president of the National Elections Authority are very far from the truth," end quote. He did not offer any evidence to back his claim. Provisional results show President Faustin Archange Touadera won 76.1% of the votes to gain a third term, and Dolaguele received 14.6%. A spokesperson for Tuadera, Evariste I'm going to spell this, Ngamana, said Dolaguele was playing the role of a sore loser and denied the allegations of manipulation. Final election results are expected on January 20th. The major opposition coalition boycotted the vote after a referendum allowed the removal of presidential term limits. Former Prime Minister Henri-Marie Dondre, who received 3.19% of the vote, also demanded the election be cancelled, alleging fraud and violations of electoral law. Central African Republic, long threatened by armed groups, is one of the countries on the continent that has turned toward Russia for security help. The Wagner mercenary group has been responsible for Tuadera's security, but tensions have grown between Tuadera and Russia after Moscow demanded that Wagner be replaced with the Russian military unit African Corps. Speaking Russian state news agency TASS on Tuesday, Tuadera expressed admiration for Putin and said he had invited him to visit and was waiting on a response. It was not clear when the invitation had been extended. Quote, I consider him one of the most outstanding political figures in the world and a truly great leader for the entire global community, end quote, Tuadera said. Pope Leo XIV signals reforms ahead with the Holy Year over, by Nicole Winfield. A day after closing out the 2025 Holy Year, Pope Leo XIV on Wednesday opened a new phase of his pontificate by gathering the world's cardinals to Rome and indicating some reform-minded priorities going forward. For starters, Leo signaled an emphasis on more fully implementing the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, the 1960s meetings that modernized and revolutionized the Catholic Church. He called the Vatican II teachings the, quote, guiding star, end quote, of the Church. Leo told his weekly general audience that for the foreseeable future, he would devote his weekly catechism lessons to a rereading of key Vatican II documents, noting that the generation of bishops and theologians who had attended the meetings and crafted the reforms are dead. Quote, therefore, while we hear the call not to let its prophecy fade and to continue to seek ways and means to implement its insights, it will be important to get to know it again closely, and to do so not through hearsay or interpretations that have been given, but by rereading its documents and reflecting on their content, end quote, he said. Quote, indeed, it is the magisterium that still constitutes the guiding star of the Church's journey today, end quote. Among other things, Vatican II allowed for use of the vernacular rather than Latin for Mass. It called for greater participation of the lay faithful in the life of the Church and revolutionized Catholic relations with Jews and people of other faiths. Leo has also indicated a reform-minded agenda for his two-day meeting of cardinals, which gets underway Wednesday afternoon. He called the consistory, as such meetings are known, to begin the day after he closed the 2025 Holy Year, suggesting that he too saw the end of the Jubilee as an opportunity to unofficially start his pontificate and look ahead to his own agenda. Leo's first few months as Pope were dominated by fulfilling the intense Holy Year obligations of meeting with pilgrimage groups, celebrating the special Jubilee audiences and Masses, and wrapping up the outstanding matters of Pope Francis's pontificate. The Vatican said Leo's first consistory was aimed at, quote, fostering common discernment and offering support and advice to the Holy Father in the exercise of his high and grave responsibility in the government of the universal Church, end quote. It was a significant gesture since Francis had relied not on consistories or the College of Cardinals as a whole to help him govern, but rather a small, hand-picked group of 9 cardinals who met every few months at the Vatican. Before the May conclave that elected Leo, cardinals had complained about Francis's go-it-alone governing style, suggesting that Leo was responding to their requests to be consulted more about running the 1.4 billion strong church. On the agenda is a discussion of two of Francis's key reform documents, his original mission statement issued at the start of his pontificate, and the 2022 document that reformed the Vatican bureaucracy. Also being discussed is Francis's call for the Church to be more, quote, synodal, end quote, or responsive to the needs of rank-and-file Catholics, and a discussion of the liturgy according to Vatican News. The last agenda item is believed to refer to divisions within the Church over the Old Latin Mass, which was celebrated before the Vatican II reforms allowed Mass in different languages, with the active participation of the faithful. Francis has greatly restricted the celebration of the Old Latin Mass, arguing its spread in recent years had created divisions in the Church. But Francis's crackdown fueled a strong conservative and traditionalist backlash against him, especially in the United States, which the Chicago-born Leo seems keen to try to pacify. There are currently 245 cardinals, almost equally split between those who are under 80 and voted in the conclave that elected Leo and those who are older. The Vatican hasn't said how many are expected to attend. One senior cardinal, though, was listed prominently on Leo's agenda of private audiences Wednesday. Cardinal Joseph Zen, the retired Archbishop of Hong Kong. Zen, who turns 94 next week, was a fierce conservative critic of Francis, especially over the Pope's outreach to China, and complained for years that the Argentine Jesuit wouldn't receive him in private audience. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. CIA turncoat Aldrich Ames, who sold U.S. secrets to the Soviets, dies in prison at 84, by the Associated Press. CIA turncoat Aldrich Ames, who betrayed Western intelligence assets to the Soviet Union and Russia in one of the most damaging intelligence breaches in U.S. history, has died in a Maryland prison. He was 84. A spokesperson for the Bureau of Prisons confirmed Ames died Monday. Ames, a 31-year CIA veteran, admitted being paid $2.5 million by Moscow for U.S. secrets from 1985 until his arrest in 1994. His disclosures included the identities of 10 Russian officials and 1 Eastern European who were spying for the United States or Great Britain, along with spy satellite operations, eavesdropping, and general spy procedures. His betrayals are blamed for the executions of Western agents working behind the Iron Curtain and were a major setback to the CIA during the Cold War. He pleaded guilty without a trial to espionage and tax evasion and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Prosecutors said he deprived the United States of valuable intelligence material for years. He professed, quote, profound shame and guilt, end quote, for, quote, this betrayal of trust done for the basest motives, end quote, money to pay debts. But he downplayed the damage he caused, telling the court he did not believe he had, quote, noticeably damaged, end quote, the United States or, quote, noticeably aided, end quote, Moscow. Quote, these spy wars are a sideshow, which have had no real impact on our significant security interests over the years, end quote, he told the court, questioning the value that leaders of any country derive from vast networks of human spies around the globe. In a jailhouse interview with the Washington Post the day before he was sentenced, Ames said he was motivated to spy by, quote, financial troubles, immediate and continuing, end quote. Ames was working in the Soviet Eastern European Division at the CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia, when he first approached the KGB, according to an FBI history of the case. He continued passing secrets to the Soviets while stationed in Rome for the CIA and after returning to Washington. Meanwhile, the U.S. intelligence community was frantically trying to figure out why so many agents were getting discovered by Moscow. Ames's spying coincided with that of FBI agent Robert Hatson, who was caught in 2001 and charged with taking $1.4 million in cash and diamonds to sell secrets to Moscow. He died in prison in 2023. Ames's wife, Rosario, pleaded guilty to lesser espionage charges of assisting his spying and was sentenced to 63 months in prison. Corporation for Public Broadcasting votes itself out of existence by David Bauder. Leaders of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private agency that has steered federal funding to PBS, NPR, and hundreds of public television and radio stations across the country, voted Monday to dissolve the organization that was created in 1967. CPB had been winding down since Congress acted last summer to defund its operations at the encouragement of President Donald Trump. Its board of directors chose Monday to shutter CPB completely instead of keeping it in existence as a shell. Quote, CPB's final act would be to protect the integrity of the public media system and the democratic values by dissolving, rather than allowing the organization to remain defunded and vulnerable to additional attacks, end quote, said Patricia Harrison, the organization's president and CEO. Many Republicans have long accused public broadcasting, particularly its news programming, of being biased toward liberals, but it wasn't until the second Trump administration, with full GOP control of Congress, that those criticisms were turned into action. Ruby Calvert, head of CPB's board of directors, said the federal defunding of public media has been devastating. Quote, even at this moment, I am convinced that public media will survive and that a new Congress will address public media's role in our country because it is critical to our children's education, our history, culture, and democracy to do so, end quote, Calvert said. CPB said it was financially supporting the American Archive of Public Broadcasting in its effort to preserve historic content and is working with the University of Maryland to maintain its own records. Quebec's Superior Court approves class action against Ticketmaster over service fees by the Canadian Press. The Quebec Superior Court has authorized a class action lawsuit against Ticketmaster that accuses the American company of charging abusive service fees on ticket sales. In a ruling dated Monday, Justice Eleni Giannakis said the plaintiffs met the conditions for a full trial and that compensatory refunds would be allowed if they win the case. The class action filed by Montreal law firm Paquette Gadler says the service fees charged by Ticketmaster violate Quebec's Consumer Protection Act and the Quebec Civil Code. The lawsuit says Ticketmaster's fees fluctuate based on ticket prices rather than the actual cost of the service provided, a pricing scheme the law firm says is abusive. It was filed in August 2024 on behalf of plaintiff Philippe Morales and members including Quebecers who have bought tickets through Ticketmaster to North American shows since July 2021. Ticketmaster, which sells tickets to concerts, sporting events, and other shows around the world, did not immediately return a request for comment on Monday's ruling. Beau Bichette gets meaty offer from Toronto restaurant to stay with the Blue Jays by Gabriel Hilty. A Toronto restaurant is the latest to try and woo a free agent athlete to stay in the city. On Monday, Animal Steakhouse in downtown Toronto appealed to star infielder Beau Bichette with a lifetime supply of steak in the hopes of enticing him to re-sign with the Toronto Blue Jays. In a post on Instagram, the restaurant offered the shortstop the juicy deal of a standing reservation for free steak without contract negotiations or fine print. Quote, we'll handle the dinner, you bring home the hardware, end quote, the post said. Bichette has previously said the restaurant is one of his favorites. Bichette, who got married this week, played second base after returning from injury during the World Series run that saw the Blue Jays lose out to the Los Angeles Dodgers in Game 7. He remains a free agent, but has repeatedly stated a desire to stay in Toronto and win a championship with the Jays. Bichette signed a 3-year deal with the Jays in 2023, worth $33.6 million. The sweetheart deal for Bichette offered by the Toronto Steakhouse is the latest in the saga of local establishments trying to convince free agents to stick with their teams. Mere days after the Toronto Raptors brought the first NBA championship to the city in 2019, fans started making offers to entice superstar and finals MVP Kawhi Leonard to re-sign with the team. The Toronto Public Library offered Leonard the free perks like museum passes and access to books and movies that come with all library cards, and one realtor was willing to offer Leonard his choice of free accommodation in one of Toronto's luxury penthouses. The most widespread initiative to impress the 6'6" forward, who earned over $23 million in his year with the Raptors, was the Kawine and Dine campaign. Dozens of businesses, including restaurants, barbershops, and movie theaters across the Greater Toronto area, tried to woo the superstar with free products and the initiative started by Raptors blog, Raptors Republic. The free offers didn't end up swaying Leonard, who ended up leaving the Raptors for his hometown Los Angeles Clippers team in the 2019 offseason. Whether the proposal of free steak impresses Bichette will be seen by the time the Jays start their seasons in the spring. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the 7th of January issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Rachel Durkin Durga. Thank you for listening.